Yeah, I love it.
No worries.
Start over. Sorry.
I think we got to keep that in.
You can. Yeah.
All right, here we go. 3, 2. Welcome in, Minnesota sports fans, to another edition of Timberwolves on SI right here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Joe Nelson and Nolan O'Hara. Boys, it's finally time. We've waited long enough. We're finally here. Timberwolves season at hand tonight against the Los Angeles Lakers in LA tonight. Let's jump right into this prediction and preview video here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. And let's get your guys' expectations for the Wolves this season, coming off a third place finish in the Western Conference and then getting to the Western Conference Finals last year. Joe, you first, then Nolan.
Well, I put out 5 bold predictions, and I've got them like I did last year, going to the NBA Finals. This year, I have them taking on the Philadelphia 76ers. You can't look at this now this year and laugh at that prediction. Last year, it's fair. Everybody could say, hey, they're not ready for it yet. They were close. They were damn near good enough to get to the NBA Finals, but they came up just short in the conference finals to Dallas. This year, I think this team is deeper. I think they're a better scoring team, and I think they'll still be high-end elite on defense. I know the West is stacked. It's going to be tough, but they're young. They're fresh. They've now got the experience necessary. I do really believe they are a front runner to go to the conference finals again this year, but finally get over the hump and take this Minnesota starving state to the promised land.
Nolan?
I think they are still a contender. I think they are going to be one of the leading contenders for the Western Conference Finals as well. I do think it will take some time to figure out how all the new pieces fall into place. So I think as far as the regular season goes, I think you're maybe looking more in the middle of the 3-4 seed kind of range rather than like a 1-2 seed. I think it's just going to take some time to figure out how everything falls into place. But I do think they will figure it out. I think you can see already Dante DiVincenzo is a very good fit on this team, especially with them not really having a true backup point guard. I think he takes on that role, and I think he will do it very well. Certainly stretches the floor and everything too. Yeah, I just think it'll take a little bit of time. We only had the one preseason game with the starting 5 in place, and Naz Reid didn't play in that game. So it's really like they're going to be feeling it out tonight. They're going to be feeling it out on Thursday and on Saturday here, and I think that'll take 20 or so games to really get going. But I think once they do, they will be right up there with the likes of Dallas and OKC, who I think are going to be their biggest competition in the West this year. But I do think they'll be right there in the mix with them.
You know, I saw Kendrick Perkins on ESPN earlier in the day, and he was saying that the Timberwolves are the biggest mystery in the NBA. I think that is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. The biggest mystery in the NBA is the team that brings back a 24-year-old megastar, is the team that has Rudy Gobert still at center, the defensive player of the year, is the team that still has the veteran 37-year-old point guard Mike Conley Jr., is the team that found a better backup point guard option in Dante DiVincenzo, is the team that has another year older Jaden McDaniels, who should be in the conversation for defensive player of the year. And if he ups his game on the offensive end at all, that's going to be a nightmare for any kind of team out there. Is the team that just gave Naz Reid more run, and he was already lifting off last season, 10 shots a game. His per 36 minutes are basically equal to Karl Anthony Towns. There's going to be no drop-off here. And then you have Julius Randle, who's a dog. He goes for 24, 10, and 5 almost every single season. This team's going to score more. They're going to defend at an equally high level. And then you go out and get more veteran depth off the bench. Okay, Kyle Anderson's gone. That's leadership loss, but your offensive gain is there with Joe Ingles. He's a 40% career three-point shooter. He's going to be asked to play limited minutes. Josh Minot might take a step this year and flash some potential to be basically the 10th guy off the bench. Nickeil Alexander-Walker gets lost in the shuffle, but he was fantastic. He's playing for a big contract. He's going to be ultra motivated. Up and down this roster, there's not a weakness. There really is not a weakness anywhere on this team. So as long as they stay healthy, there's no mystery. It's just a fact. They're one of the best teams in the NBA.
I think they're definitely one of the deepest teams. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. You look at they probably have more guys that than they can actually even play.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at it, most teams use an eight, maybe nine-man rotation, and Finch is kind of like in the past like to use a nine-man, but more limited in that ninth spot role. But they have more guys than you can even play. I mean, Luka Garza, he just scored almost 30 points in the preseason game. He's not going to play at all. The depth, I don't think they're a question mark as to whether they'll be good. I think if you're going to say question mark is how good, because I don't think this trade you can't just look at it and say they're immediately better. I don't think Julius Randle is a better player than Karl Anthony Towns. I think having Dante DiVincenzo off the bench is a really really nice uh, brings a lot into the mix. But I don't think that's maybe his question mark take, because and it's going to take time to figure it out, especially spacing wise. Where Julius Randle's not the 3-point shooter Towns is, so you don't not going to just want to keep throwing him out on the wing, no ball in his hands a lot of the time, like you could with Karl Anthony Towns kind of taking that sidestep to Anthony Edwards last year.
It's interesting too. Those are all really good points, but I think the Timberwolves almost handcuffed Chris Finch and his guru on the offensive side of the ball. Right? Like this is a guy who comes to Minnesota 4 years ago, and his reputation is he knows how to coach offense. Right? Well, then you stick him with 2 7-footers, and you're saying, hey, let's make chicken salad out of chicken bleep. Right? So he does that, but he was really handcuffed in the amount of things he could do with that offense. Now you're not as big, you're more versatile. There's almost going to be no time ever where you don't have four guys who can really handle the rock and really shoot the ball from deep on the court this season. Literally everybody. If you've got Conley, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert in the starting lineup, four of those guys are at least a threat to shoot from outside. Then you go off the bench and you go DiVincenzo, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, or Nikhil Alexander Walker, or Naz Reid with Randall and Gobert. You might have five guys that are a threat to spread the floor and shoot. I just think it opens up and it's limitless potential. And you're looking at something that's more mimicking the Boston Celtics, who have four guys who are basically guards at all times on the floor, and they can shoot and kill you in transition all night long, 48 minutes. That's kind of what I think is unfolding here. And let's not forget, too, that Tim Connolly constructed the championship team that Denver had a couple of seasons ago. That team was his baby. He built that thing, and he's the architect behind this trade. Nobody in their right mind should question whether the Timberwolves had a net gain or a net loss by losing Karl Anthony Towns and replacing him with DiVincenzo and Randall.
I think one thing that is interesting to take into account too, Julius Randle used to play under Chris Finch when Finch was an assistant in New Orleans. And Randall said at the time that was the freest his game's ever felt. And at the time, that was the best season of his career. So I think it will be, I do think it will take time, but I do think Finch will figure it out. And I think this is going to be a team that's in the mix contending for a championship this year.
You guys have mentioned all these new pieces and how they're going to fit in. So we've seen now through preseason play. What do we expect this starting five to look like throughout the season? Is it simply just swapping out Karl Anthony Towns for Julius Randle, or is there going to be some fluctuation there and some switching around that we'll see throughout the season?
It's going to be essentially swapping Karl Anthony Towns for Julius Randle. I think Mike Conley might get a few more rest days this year if he allows it, and then you'd probably see Dante in at point. So back to backs, those kind of things. Finch kind of alluded to wanting to give him a few more days off. He's like, if Mike lets me, Mike usually doesn't like to sit out, but I think they probably will have a little bit more of that. But yeah, I think essentially, I don't think you're going to see major changes throughout the year. I could be wrong; something could come up, but assuming everybody stays healthy, you're just swapping in Randall for
How
Yeah.
Town.
does yeah? Go
Well,
ahead, Joe.
quick addition to that thought is that I think it's been pretty clearly stated that Mike Conley's going to play mid-20s minutes. And that means I think DiVincenzo's probably going to get over 30 minutes a game or 30 minutes a game. I think he's going to get more minutes per night than Conley is. So The de facto starting five is, Conley, Edwards, McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert. But in reality, the guy who's more important to the overall success of the team and is on the floor more this year, including in crunch time and clutch situations, in my opinion, will be DiVincenzo.
So how do we expect this depth to fill in, and how do we expect Chris Finch to use this depth? We've talked about they're probably the deepest team in the Western Conference. It feels like they're significantly deeper than they were last year with some of these guys that they brought in the offseason and with all these moves. How do we expect these additions, these offseason additions, and maybe the development of the Lucas Garza, the Josh Minots, the Leonard Millers to fill in on this roster?
Let me say this real quick. I'll give you two scenarios because I think the crunch time minutes are going to be the biggest. Let's say you need a bucket late in the game. I think your lineup, regardless of matchups, in most cases, is going to be Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, Dante DiVincenzo, Julius Randle, and Naz Reid. You need a bucket. You've got five lethal scorers that you can turn to, right? That's beautiful. If you need a stop, I think you're going DiVincenzo at the one, Ant at the two, Jaden at the three, Julius Randle, or if you want to go smaller against a smaller team, you could even put in Nikhil Alexander Walker and essentially run four guards or three guards, and then McDaniels as your forward, and then Rudy at the five. So I think those are your options if you need a bucket versus you need to stop.
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead,
one of
Mike.
the interesting things as far as the depth this year will be kind of how they use it. You know, who's the three off the bench will be playing the most? It'll be Nikhil, Nas, and Dante. But then if they do choose to use that ninth spot, I think that's where there's going to be some. I'm not sure exactly who it is going to be, and I don't know if they really know yet who it's going to be. I think watching the preseason, Minot got a lot of run. It looks like he could be somebody who maybe fills that void. And then I think also Ingles too. And Ingles played with Rudy Gobert in Utah and does have some. He's good at using that pick and roll with Gobert. So it could be interesting to see how much they decide to use either of those two. I don't know. It'll be a good first look tonight to kind of see what that ends up looking like as far as the depth, because I think both those options can be used different in different situations, and I think that is probably how you'll see some of the depth beyond the top eight. I think between Minot, Dillingham, if he gets any time, I don't think he'll get a whole lot to start off the year, but I think seeing how those kind of work in and what situations Finch uses those other depth pieces in will be a really interesting thing to see kind of how that unfolds, especially these first 20 or so games and then throughout the year too.
Nolan, you mentioned Dillingham there. That was going to be my next question: is what are our expectations for the rookies this year? Dillingham drafted with the eighth overall pick in the draft. Terrence Shannon Jr. drafted a little bit later on in that first round. Joe, what do we expect to see this season from those rookies? I know Nolan just said they're probably not a whole lot early on. Do we expect that to evolve and grow throughout the season, or because of the depth that they have, are the Wolves allowed to kind of slow play these guys and bring them in slowly and develop them?
Yeah, I don't think outside of an injury that they're more than a few minutes a night, a lot of garbage time. Kind of the roles that, Josh Minot or an occasional Leonard Miller sighting over the last couple of years has been. These guys are going to be groomed into NBA lifestyle, right? Dillingham has great potential. I swear to God, he looks like Allen Iverson from time to time. But there's nowhere for him to play on this team. And you got to remember, PJ Dozier is back there too, and he's
Yeah.
got um, a veteran repertoire behind him. He played overseas last year where he ran the point. So let's say Mike Conley gets injured and you need some point guard minutes. I think Dante DiVincenzo is your starter in that situation. But then you might have PJ Dozier getting 15 minutes tonight in that scenario before Dillingham's ready. And Terrence Shannon Jr., he's 24, 25 years old already, and I could see him maybe stepping into a role sooner than Dillingham just because he's more mature and he's got the ability to get to the line and score, and he's kind of a physical player. So, maybe there's a role if there's an injury, but again, you're backed up. Nolan mentioned Joe Ingles and Josh Minot. They both kind of play the 3-4 position there, so I think it's going to be hard to get minutes, and I think those two are going to split a lot of those ninth, 10th man minutes on most nights, and that might be 6 minutes one night, 10 minutes another night. If Jaden McDaniels gets into foul trouble, that might be their path to playing time more than any other path. So, yeah, I just don't see much room for the rookies this year.
All right, so going back to the starters, we've spent, 15 minutes of this video talking about about everybody else except the star player on the team, Anthony Edwards, who made a second All Star game last year, was All NBA last year. What's the next step for him? Do we see him in the MVP conversation this year? Is that too far, or is that what we should expect from Ant this year, Nolan?
I think it's certainly possible. I do think it's kind of a tough, as we talk about all the depth. You're playing with, I mean, Julius Randle scored 25 points a game last year too. When you're playing alongside a lot of great players like that, I think it's kind of hard to always be in that mix. But one thing I think that really stood out from the preseason is Ant's shooting. His three-point shooting looks like that's taken a pretty big leap. He was knocking down the one game where he had 30 something points. I think he was shot like 6 for 8 from three, something like that. He it looks like it has significantly improved. And I think he is there. And I think everybody in the Wolves will say he's the best on-ball defender in the league when he's, got that energy and is doing it. So I think it really is I don't I don't think he's gonna outplay like Luca or somebody like that to really like win MVP, but I think he's in the mix with those guys like Jokic, like Luca. Um, and I think he will take another step this year. But I think it does kind of, Luca he's got Kyrie next to him, but I guess it's kind of hard to see him outdoing those numbers when you do have a guy like Randall next to you when you're playing with the reigning defensive player of the year in that. And those things do kind of seem to get taken into account in the MVP race.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch how Ant's game develops here in this year 5, I believe. Um, the playoffs last year, he averaged like 28, 7, and 7 a night. So he was getting up in that SGA Luca range where, he's just stuffing the stat sheet. Playoff games, you're playing more minutes. Obviously, the onus is on you to really step up and score. I think they have more scoring options this season than they did last season when it was really just him and Cat. They had like the 17th ranked scoring offense in the NBA last year. I think they're top 5 this year for sure. Um, but I can see a scenario where Ant, based on his preseason, like you mentioned, Nolan, where he launched, I think, 8 3-pointers in one game, 13 in another, and then 16 basically in the first half against the Bulls the other night. If that's an indication of what's to come and he's just going to be jacking threes all night, if he's hitting, he could lead the league in scoring. I mean, you got to remember, he took 19 shots a game last year. I think there were 3 or 4 guys in the league last season who averaged more than 20 a game. And that Luka led the way with like 23 and a half shots per game, which is probably an actual smaller number than his attempts because he gets to the free throw line so many times, and those attempts generally don't count unless it's an and one. So if Ant's getting 21, 22 attempts per game, he certainly could average 30 a game. And if he's adding rebounds and he's adding some assists, absolutely he's in that MVP conversation. In fact, one of my bold predictions with us is that he leads the league in scoring. So you took away your number 2 scoring option last year. Someone's got to take those shots. We know Julius Randle has the reputation of gets the ball, he's like a vacuum cleaner, right? He's not giving it back. I don't think that's going to necessarily be true. He's a guy that's averaged over 5 assists per season for years now. And in Minnesota, I think he's going to understand that he's got a lot of options and he doesn't have to be the guy that's going to, be required to score. So I can see Ant definitely leading the league in scoring this season with all the pieces around him. And he is the unquestioned alpha. It's no longer he and Towns. And I know that everybody from the outside world was like, well, yeah, it's Ant's team. But Ant has said, whether he thought it or not or believed it or not, that it was him number 1 and Cat 1A, 1B, that kind of scenario. It's no longer the case. He's 1. There is nobody else. He's the one. He's Neo. He's the Matrix. 30 a game.
I know we're pushing up against a hard out for you, Joe. I got 3 quick questions, short answers from both of you. Biggest strength for this team this season? Joe, Nolan.
Depth.
I'd say defense again.
Biggest weakness?
Chris Finch's knee. They don't have a weakness. They're the most all-around team in the game.
Nolan.
That's tough too because I think they address some of the weaknesses. I just think I don't necessarily know the starting 5. I don't think it's better than last season.
All right, and then where do they finish in the regular season in the Western Conference?
Number 1. 60 wins.
I say 3.
Three again. All right. Good stuff from you boys. Looking forward to it. Season opener tonight in Los Angeles against the Lakers on national TV. Cannot wait. This is going to be exciting. Another Wolves season and lots of expectations. Minnesota sports fans, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Does help us get found. Does help the algorithm. It also notifies you every time we post a new video here on the YouTube channel. We'll talk to you tomorrow. We've got 5 matchups Wednesday because of the Vikings game on Thursday. It's coming up with Will Raggets tomorrow here on the YouTube channel. Talk to you then.